Well, I wonder if you've ever had one of those weeks where you've done something that's not quite the thing you expected to be doing. At one of my jobs this week, I ended up doing some office DIY. That was drilling and screwing and fixing something into concrete. A job for which you need to be accurate and precise, neither of which are actually my forte. You need the right tools, and you need the knowledge and the ability, and there's a certain amount of willingness to get rather dusty needed too. What you really need for something like that is someone who is ready and willing, but also able. Unfortunately, we had a slight issue with that in the office. Kay, who's running the tech for us, is usually the go-to person, but at the moment, while she is ready, and she'd love to be able to do this job, she's willing, and she has all the tools, and she's organised, and she knows what to do, and she's done it before. She's not at the moment necessarily so able to do it. At least she could do it, but then she'd have physical consequences afterwards. So we turned to Ian. I don't even have to say that line, do I? It's Ian, who is neither ready nor willing nor able. He said I could say that, honest. And not only that, he's got bigger responsibilities. He runs the business. He is not DIY gifted. He's clumsy. And there were other deadlines. No, that's perfectly accurate. I'm just slightly less clumsy. That's the difference. Now, I was there as well on this day. And you could argue that I was not ready either. I turned up forgetting that this was on the agenda in smart suit trousers and smart shoes that were in rather a state by the end of it. And I don't really know what I'm doing, but I am able to wield a drill, pull a button, push a button, and hope for the best. So we had a go. Of course, the ideal thing would be someone who is all three: ready, willing, and able. Well, in this passage, we'll see Jesus as the one who is ready, willing, and able to heal as we come to this new section of Matthew's Gospel. We've been working through this Gospel over the last 3 years. This is our third series. We're going to look at chapters 8 to 11 over the next 10 weeks. But let's just take a moment to get our bearing in the book, because it's never good to just parachute in and not know where you are. We started at Christmas 2019, can you believe it? Looking at the kingdom's arrival. As we looked at chapters 1 to 4, we saw how Jesus, born into this world as a baby, is a king in the line of famous King David. And he was presented with king-making gifts by the Magi, pointing out the path his life and reign would take. We followed the path with him behind John, who had gone before him to make a way for his public ministry. That was the public ministry of the one called Emmanuel, God with us. Last summer, as we reopened, not last summer now, it was the summer before, as we reopened after COVID, we looked at the Kingdom's Manifesto, chapters 5 to 7, where Jesus sat his disciples and wider followers down on a hill to teach them what to expect as his kingdom broke into their lives. It's more commonly known as the Sermon on the Mount, and in it, Jesus sets out what life under his rule is really like. It is one in which his people are gradually but fundamentally transformed into the likeness of their king. His teaching had astonished the crowds that heard it. The sermon and chapter 7 finish with these words, which you may want to just look back at, from Matthew 7, verses 28 to 29. When Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. You see, Jesus didn't endlessly cite other authorities like the religious leaders of the day. He didn't even speak like a prophet saying, "This is what the Lord says." His authority isn't delegated. It wasn't a matter of religious training. It was inherent in who he was. He wasn't interpreting the law for them. He was making it. He was the one who had made it. And what is more, they people began to see their eternal destiny depends upon their relationship to him. To hear and obey his word is the way of life. The people are amazed, though, at the authority with which he speaks. They're astonished at the sweeping power that he claims for himself. But as we come into chapter 8 in this series that we've called The Kingdom's Way, as Jesus comes down from this mountain of revelation to enter into the valley of shadow where sickness and demonic forces are rife, can he deliver? Will people accept his rule? Will people opt into his kingdom? What does this power of his kingdom look like? And can he deal with those who oppose him? Is he ready, willing, and able to demonstrate and prove his identity and authority on the ground? Well, the verses that Philip read for us, we see the beginning of a series of miraculous healings, events where what only God could do, Jesus does with a word, or occasionally a touch. As Jesus heals, so the disciples see his power, and we see that kingdom's way is to break into the world, reaching out to even the marginalized, breaking down purity or ethnic or gender barriers so that everyone may respond to his invitation to the kingdom of heaven. Everybody is invited. And so the challenge for us this morning as we look at the passage is to see Jesus' power to heal and to come to him and his kingdom. Because no matter who we are, he welcomes us and wants us to come. So let's see that by looking at the three sections of the passage, three portraits, if you will, of Jesus' divine power as a healer. Each of them show us that he, because each section begins with a reminder that Jesus is the person this is happening to, or through, that he is able, because each is a miraculous display of his power. And he is ready and willing, because he wants to welcome all into his kingdom as he encounters them here. So let's see the first four verses where we see Jesus reaching out to the infectious outcast. So look with me at verse 1. When he, again, so there we are, this is about what Jesus is doing, came down the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." So the need is clear. Matthew doesn't hold on and sort of describe the scenery, he just gets to the events. The need, healing is needed from this leprosy. Because no disease was more dreaded in the ancient world than leprosy. It seems to have been a week of thinking about leprosy because the passage from Mark I preached on last Sunday evening was the equivalent passage of this. We looked at Naaman and his healing from leprosy in Upload. The outcome, though, didn't matter which of the two times we're looking at, was death. But before that, it sentenced sufferers to a living death, gradually spreading throughout the body, causing sensation to cease, and more body parts to become disfigured or fall off. I was going to drop something at that point just to make the effect, but let's not go there. And to my mind, then also worse than that was the permanent social distancing on steroids. I mean, I call it anti-social distancing, but anyway, that marked their existence. For the sake of everyone, and because in Jewish minds and God's law this disease made people unclean, they had to live outside of towns and cities. They had to cry unclean if anyone was in their vicinity. No one would risk contact with them for fear of contracting the disease. It was a life of no more family, no more friends, no more hugs, no more handshakes, no more parents, no more children, no more spouses, no more going to church, no more family, no more shopping. And to make things worse, in a time of little diagnosis and treatment, many other skin diseases were lumped in and called leprosy too. It's significant that whenever other diseases are described, they're described as healed. When we come to leprosy, the language used is cleansed. The trouble was, of course, that leprosy sufferers couldn't be healed. There was no known cure. And what is Jesus' response? Well, Matthew, straight to the point, gives less detail than even Mark, but the outcome is the same. Jesus is willing. Jesus reached out his hand, verse 3, touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately he was cured of his leprosy. Think of the significance of how that happened. He has and he will continue to heal with a word. But he chose to heal here with a touch. Imagine the sudden drawing of breath amongst the crowd as Jesus reaches out his hand. Imagine the sort of drawing of breath that was similar to those present at the moment when Princess Diana first on the news shook hands with a man who was suffering HIV. She did it in front of the world's media at a time when understanding meant people were worried that just shaking someone's hand without gloves was a means of transmission. But Jesus' touch heals the man, doesn't just take away the stigma of the disease. So we see Jesus not only has the power to heal, divine power, kingdom power, but he is willing to extend it to those whom others shunned. He is willing to be associated with those who are unclean and tainted and shunned, that they may experience his kingdom. And then verse 4 we read, Jesus says to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest. Offer the sacrifice and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. You see, to us, we're probably thinking the pinnacle of the story has already happened. The cleansing is amazing. He's no longer separated from everyone. I mean, think of the joy on his face. I mean, how glad have we been when we've reached the end of our quarantines to out the house the second the test has been negative, whatever time of the night it was. Maybe that's just me. But the pinnacle here is the fulfillment of the law. Or the fulfillment of it. Jesus fulfills the law required for a leper to re-enter society. So he sends him to the priest. And the act then becomes a testimony to the man's cleansing and his right to rejoin society. But the fact, too, that one greater than Moses, through whom their law was given when he came down from a mountain of revelation into a dark valley, or one greater than him has come. So what should our response be? Well, our response should be to seek Jesus' willingness to cleanse us. You see, in its causing of separation, fatality, and being a danger to bystanders, leprosy illustrates the position of everyone who has ever lived too. You see, we are born and live out our lives in a state of uncleanness through being born as rebels against Almighty God. The Bible calls that sin. That is the definition. Rebellion, treason is the essence of sin. And it isolates all who have contracted it from the presence of God and any relationship with him. Not only that, it's infectious, its symptoms are. You see, we can see someone else's symptom and end up copying it. You don't even have to catch it. And that's really dangerous because actually everyone's rebellion looks different. We might call it personal freedom or self-expression. But if it's taking God out of his rightful place, it is sin. And in reaching out to touch and cleanse the leper, Jesus demonstrates the kingdom's way of reaching out to and willingly receiving the unclean, the sinner, through cleansing them. See, the law is fulfilled. The cleansing happens and is testified to. And it tells us of the kingdom's way, that this is just a glimpse of the path he is on beyond this moment of this encounter. one that means he is able to make that offer of reaching out and cleansing available beyond these one-on-one encounters with him in first century Palestine. No, this is available now because of what he went on to do. It is because he followed through on that plan, the kingdom way of going to the cross and dying as a sacrifice to fulfill the Jewish, but more importantly, God's laws, that we can pray the prayer of confession as we did earlier and know we're forgiven. We can turn to him that first time in repentance and seeking new life and receive it. It is only because he carried on that we can have any hope, and by hope I mean certainty, of acceptance by God. If we've sought that cleansing, that forgiveness through his sacrificial death, we can be forgiven by the one we have offended. We need to seek his forgiveness in the way he is offering it, because he has served the sentence for it already. Jesus is willing to cleanse the unclean. Secondly, we see him responding to a foreigner's faith. Verse 5, when Jesus had entered Capernaum, there's our reminder, this is about Jesus, remember, don't miss it. A centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed and in terrible suffering. There is urgency to the request. We could read that asking as urgently imploring. He uses the word terrible to describe the suffering. I mean, suffering's bad enough, but terrible suffering. But the interesting thing here is this is not someone who had heard all of God's promises, who had known that God would send someone, a king. This man is one of the conquering Romans. He's a centurion. He's the principal professional officer commanding a group of 100 soldiers. He's the conqueror of this land that Jesus is wandering round. And he approaches a conquered Jew for help, for healing, for his suffering servant. Well, what does Jesus do? What do we see about Jesus healing? Well, here he is able in the most amazing of ways, because as the humble Gentile expresses his faith, the healing is dramatic. Jesus says, I will go and heal him. Remember, the man is referring to him as Lord. There is a trust and a faith here. The sickness is beyond this centurion's power. He recognizes it. But he recognizes it's not beyond Jesus' power. His word, this is the centurion's word, had profoundly controlled his soldiers' every activity for the entire time he had been in their command. But his word can't solve this. However, Jesus' word, like God's word, can. And so he concludes, Jesus' presence is not necessary to heal a servant, see? Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. Notice the word Lord. But just say the word and my servant will be healed. You see, he comes in humility. This is not a gullibility sort of falling for a ruse. He has analyzed what he knows to be true. He has heard of a similar cure by Jesus, recorded for us in chapter 4. Anyone with power and authority to do that can surely not be limited by a mere single variable of distance. And so, Jesus hears him. He commends his faith. Jesus says, verse 10, I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The centurion, as Jesus says to the centurion then, verse 13, go, it will be done, just as you have believed it would. And his servant was healed at that very hour. Remember, the centurion is a Gentile. He is outside the national vision of God's people that they're working to at the time. God had never planned that to be permanent, though. God never planned for his people to be permanently limited to a single nation. The sad thing, though, is that Jesus sees before him more faith coming from someone who didn't know what to expect than those who did. See, the Jews needed to learn the lesson which their ancestors knew. It hadn't been hidden from them that the Gentiles, this message that the Gentiles are beginning to discover, along with this centurion in front of Jesus right now, that faith is the key to entry into God's kingdom. It is to know and to trust in the power of Jesus that forms the entry to his kingdom, whether you're born into more knowledge of it or not. So what should our response be, having seen Jesus' ability to heal here? Well, it should be to humbly come to Jesus in faith. We need to come in humility. That is not trusting ourselves. Some people, though, hear humility and have an internal version of autocorrect. And if you've ever seen me put anything on WhatsApp, you know I'm terrible at being outsmarted by the autocorrect. See, people hear humility and think gullibility. They think that in order to be a Christian, you have to have your brain removed or be stupid enough to believe anything, sometimes. But as we've thought, the centurion took a step based on what he had seen and heard. What are we willing to do with what we have seen and heard about Jesus so far? The loneliness and separation of the leper is the illustration of where trusting ourselves, self-sufficiency, leads. It leads to separation and isolation and destruction. We need a solution that is not of ourselves. You see, humility learns to trust in something else or someone else. And the question is, what? So someone put this little story together. Suppose you have a good doctor. She's terrific and she's able to analyse symptoms with remarkable speed and always gives you the right diagnosis. And she never misses the quickest option for the remedy. You know certain things are true about her, facts. That is why you have such faith in her. She's still employed. Good fact for a doctor. She's treated you before, and it's been good. She's got a track record. Therefore, you don't go back to first principles when you go back to see her, do you? You don't think, well, I don't know what this doctor is like. No, I've been before. Not only that, if someone comes up to you and says, I gather you've got a great doctor. I wish I had your faith. You turn around, what do you mean? No, you wish you'd got my doctor. Because it's what our faith is in that's important, isn't it? It doesn't matter what doctor is, whether if you believe she's good or not. If she's not good, she's not going to heal you. You see, it's the object of our faith, who or what we are trusting in, that matters. And as Christians, therefore, are simply those people, like this centurion, who have come to realize that Jesus is special, human, yet divine, worthy of our love, our worship, our devotion, and our trust. And so everything in life has been reorganized in referring to him. But more about that in a moment. This is the difference, though, that Jesus says in verses 11 and 12, that there are two potential outcomes. Take their places at the feast in the kingdom of heaven, or be thrown outside. The difference between the two is faith in Jesus. There's no genetic code or ethnic background or family history that brings us into God's kingdom. There's no religious background that does it either. There's no christening or baptism or confirmation or Sunday school or Christian union or giving or attending or serving that can bring us into his kingdom. There's one and only one thing that matters: faith, trust in Jesus, looking at who he has shown himself to be and deciding to trust it. The sad reality of Jesus' warning is that it may well be the good, moral, religious people filling maybe many churches today, or those who end up thrown outside because the faith might not be their own. But Jesus invites us to come to him in faith, and that is an eternity-changing faith. Finally, Jesus restores a sick woman to full strength. Look with me at verse 14. When Jesus came to Peter's house, reminder, this is about Jesus again. He saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. So here's the need. This need healing from the fever, and as we read on, there's all sorts of other people come out of the woodwork, as you will. It could have been malaria, the fever, often that it was described this way. But what do we see about Jesus healing? There's not really much to pad this bit out with. It's like that, isn't it? Verse 15, he touched her, the fever left her, and she got up and began to wait on them. The healing was immediate and complete. He is always ready, even in private, to heal, and the healing is immediate. Wonderful. She gets up, she serves them. There's been much worry, hasn't there, over the last 2 years about the length it takes to recover from COVID. Sometimes we worry about how long it takes to recover from a cold. Some people have found it really hard to get going again afterwards. But notice how long Jesus' healing takes to come to full effect. Oh, as long as it takes for him to have touched her. And she is completely healed. She gets up and starts serving. And Jesus doesn't stop there. You see, one healing might be enough for one day, you might think, or at least one evening. But Jesus continues. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him. And he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. Again, all these people would have been outcasts, and yet Jesus heals them. We're not told what background they were from, but Jesus heals them. We don't know how badly ill they were, but Matthew says Jesus healed them with a word and healed all the sick. There is a completeness to this power, this healing that Jesus offers. But this healing also actually marks a fulfillment of what the prophet Isaiah had said. Oops, my slides are slightly behind me. The final verse of our passage quotes for us a verse from the Old Testament. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. Whenever Matthew, or any New Testament writer for that matter, quotes an Old Testament verse, it's a good idea to remember that we need to go and figure out what that passage means first. I've said this before, but Old Testament quotations in New Testament text work a little bit like a hyperlink. What is a hyperlink? Well, it's a one line of text that links you to significantly more information when you click on it. That's what these Old Testament quotes are like. You click on them, you follow them through to where they come from, and we find a whole lot of more information to help us understand what we've been reading. And so if you look at the footnote at the bottom of your page, you'll be told that this quote is from Isaiah 53 and verse 4. A passage that prophesies Jesus' death and resurrection. And that there is the clue to help us understand why Matthew quotes this verse here. You see, the sad fact is that just as we saw leprosy illustrates disease, leprosy illustrates sin, all sickness and disease are symptoms of the far more serious disease, sin. It afflicts us all, because we are all rebels. The whole world, the whole of the created order is affected. Jesus' healing ministry was a pointer to the far more important healing that he would achieve on the cross. because it would be there that he would deal with the disease behind everything. Sin was dealt with on the cross once for all. And in that sense, Isaiah 53 verse 4 is fulfilled as Jesus bore our infirmities and carried our diseases. Therefore, we can be forgiven spiritually. We can have that sickness cured. We can be forgiven. And we will then get to enjoy the new creation of his king, which is for his kingdom and his kingdom alone, where there is no sickness, disease, crying, danger, or death. So how are we called to respond here? How are we called to come to him? Well, we're called to come to him gratefully, in grateful service. We see that in the mother-in-law's response. Very few of us feel like entertaining the second with the cold's gone, do we? But these days we're going to be encouraged not to. But now, because Jesus has made us alive, has cleansed us, has welcomed us as we come to him by faith, we can come to him in service. We can refer all our hopes for our family and our friends. We can pattern all our use of money and our ambitions. We can give all of our time and place it under his authority, under his loving rule. We can live asking the question, what will please him? What does he want? That is the Christian faith. It's not a magical, mystical thing. It is something that is reasonable, intensely personal, incredibly practical. That doesn't mean it's not supernatural, but it's not magical and mystical. It is, who is this person? Who does he claim to be? Do you believe he is who he claims to be? Will you put your trust in him? But we also know he has the power to heal and is concerned at all times, even in the friend's house in the evening. And so part of that service is bringing those needs to him through prayer. He gives no guarantees this side of the kingdom's total reign of their healing. And he often uses means such as doctors and medicine to achieve it. But he does care and he does have power. And we should come to him, gratefully bringing others and our own needs to him. So the conclusion, have we got to it? Is he ready, willing and able? Is he always ready? Well, Matthew says to us, yes, he reigns supreme over the physical world of disease. He even reigns over death. His authority is that of God. So can he deliver what is promised in the Sermon on the Mount? Well, there's no question about it. Will people accept his rightful rule in their lives? Well, that's the question for us, isn't it? For you. Thinking about the idea of ready, willing and able brought to mind a song we used to sing on a camp I used to go to as a kid. The second half of it was always the same, but the first line of the first verse was this: he's ready and willing and able to save you. Only believe his word. Verse 2 began, he loves you, he wants you, he died to redeem you. Only believe his word. And then the second half of all the verses went, his message today is, I am the way. Believe on the Saviour and no longer delay, for he is ready and willing and able to save you. Only believe his word. Ian's going to lead us in prayer now.